Welcome everyone to our next part of the COVID-19 webinar series for Southbury. I am Kevin Bielmeyer, the Economic Development Director here in Southbury. And joining me for this episode is Ron Pugliese, President and CEO of the Naugatuck Economic Development Corp. So welcome, Ron.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure.
Good afternoon, everybody who's listening.
Yes, and so we've got some folks that are joining us for this Zoom call, and we are recording it as well, and we'll be able to share the playback after we're done here today, sharing the results of the COVID-19 Southbury Economic Development Business Survey that was conducted. So that is what we're going to cover today. And so, without further ado, let's get to it, shall we? So the survey, I'd like to first of all thank the Economic Development Commission for Southbury for commissioning this survey and allowing us to have the survey out to the business community at Southbury. I'd also like to thank those who filled out the survey, who took the time to do it. It took about 10 minutes or so. It was conducted over a 3-week period, mid-April to mid-May. And I'd also like to do a shout out to Gosha Leidlich, our digital communication specialist, for all of her help with this survey and with this presentation. So we have a lot to get to, so I'm just going to dive right in. The first question we asked, which is not on here, was the name, if they wanted to give it, of who took the survey. We asked what their role was, and as you can see from these responses, predominantly the people filling out the survey were the owners of their business. So 82%, almost 83% were owners of the business. This shows you graphically that same data. We asked what category of business they would describe themselves as, and as you can see here, it's kind of all over the map. Probably the largest category being other. And this gives you sort of a visual sense of this. But what's interesting about this is just the makeup of the business categories within the town of Southbury. Moving on to the fourth question, what is the size of your business? And as you can see, almost 20% who filled this out were solo entrepreneurs. The largest category being between the 1 and 5. So, you know, as we look at the impact of COVID-19 on small business, certainly the snapshot we're seeing reflected in the survey is that of small business, the small business community. You can see that reflected graphically here. This I thought was interesting. How many years have you been in business? And the predominant answer was 10 plus years. So I think that definitely speaks to the longevity of doing business here in town, and also just, you know, who took the time to take this survey are obviously people that you know, they've been at their particular business for, you know, at least a decade or more. And you can see that graphically reflected there. This I thought also was interesting. As we think about what is essential, Connecticut was one of the states that kept more businesses open than many of our neighboring states and states across the country. We tried to keep as many essential businesses and expand that definition as much as possible. So with this question, as you can see, over half of the businesses that responded to this were considered essential businesses and therefore most likely remained open. Then we got to the meat of it. How has COVID-19 impacted your business? And they could select all that apply. And you can see it impacted their business in many ways. The predominant one being employees working remotely. That's the largest category, followed right on the heels by a reduced hours of operation. So I think, again, it speaks to the fact that more than half of the businesses were considered essential and kept open, but it did, of course, even being open did affect how they did their business, whether employees worked remotely. Actually, the biggest category here response was employee schedules were reduced. So despite even being open, it did not impact how they ran their business. Reduced hours, reduced employee schedules, etc. This actually continued here. There's so many answers to how it could impact your business, and you can see enormous amounts of response in areas of like cleaning the workspace, hand sanitization, and obviously, again, that speaks to being open, and that impacted their business despite being open by having to take these extra measures. Sort of a graphic depiction of it, but it's kind of more like a game board. The question 9 was, did you have to let your employees go? I was positive, happy to see this answer in that over 80% said no, they did not have to let their employees go. I think you'll see in part this is somewhat reflected in those businesses that looked to get the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program financing. You'll see that that sort of is in tandem with this answer. You'll see that graphically really shows the difference in majority in our town. And this is an area where I think we differ from the state and from the national average. I think this is a high percentage of retention. This is also interesting. The what is your annual gross revenue? Again, this is all private information, but it's just consolidated here, and you can see it's kind of a split, everything from 25% being under 100K or annual gross revenue to close to 30% at over $1 million in annual gross revenue or higher. And this is visually depicted here. Those are sort of the two main categories of answers. How do you expect your sales and revenue to change in the next quarter? Not surprisingly, there's an overwhelming expectation of decrease in comparative sales and revenue in these two comparative quarters, with 42% expecting it to be between 21 and to 50% in decrease. But a very sobering statistic of almost 23% feeling that it's going to be 50% or more to 100% even in decreased sales and revenue. And this shows you that graphic visualization of that same question. If the economic slowdown continues beyond May, and here we are now in June, what do you anticipate changing in your business operations? Select all that apply. As you can see, a high answer here is dismissing, laying off, or furloughing staff. I think this is indicative of the fact that so many at the time of taking the survey had not done that. And so the anticipation was, if this does continue, this might be a reality for us. But almost equally so, actually, perhaps a little bit past that, is don't anticipate a change in operation or staffing. So that I think reflected certainly a positive outlook, at least looking at just it going past May. Question will be is, how long does this go? So this kind of shows you those are the two primary answers: either dismissing and laying off, or don't anticipate a change. Do you have sufficient cash to operate for the next? And we give these categories of 1 week, 1 month, 3 months, 6 months. So you see the majority said they had sufficient cash to operate for about 3 months. But quite a few people checked other, and that ranged between as little as 2 weeks to as much as 2 months, and that just because that wasn't one of the categories offered. So here we are, as I said, going into June. I think one of the things that this is going to reflect is how long will it take to get cash flow back to the levels it was pre-COVID-19. And this again shows you 3 months was the typical answer there, or predominant answer for cash flow. Have you utilized or applied for the financial assistance for businesses? And there's quite a few that we listed that we could think of. I think what really jumped out at me was that the PPP, the SBA's Paycheck Protection Program, was certainly the predominant one that was applied for at 64.63%. 53 people said that they applied for that. That program, of course, was extended. It came back and had another reiteration, and there's more money still available in the PPP. So that, certainly out of all the offerings that were out there, that was the largest and the one that most people took advantage of. But as you can see, there's quite a few different loan options and grant options that people did apply for. But this graphic clearly shows the PPP was the predominant one. At that time, we were asking if you need help with the application process. There was quite a bit of challenge in that. We did a webinar on that as well. But most people on this responded that they did not. What are your biggest concerns, short-term and long-term? Now, this was a written response, and arguably, because of being written, probably provided us the most useful data, just because it's sort of from the heart. Some of the written responses consolidated here, there was obviously more than just one that said this, but were the following: businesses, again, concerns long and short term, that businesses will remain closed, that they cannot earn enough money and have reduced revenue. Will their client base return? Will the landlord keep the shared spaces clean and safe? Concern about losing clients to those who are open illegally. Continuing on with this question, increased debt, cash flow issues, or no income. Launching a new phase of my business, and this kind of speaks to the pivoting that was occurring where companies were needing to just reinvent themselves. The overall economic outlook for the state and the nation. The fact that their business requires a close proximity to clients, and how is that going to affect their short and long-term business. Getting back to where we were, health and safety, the PPP supplies, and then long-term impacts on their business, being able to endure, to stay in it for the long haul. Question 17 out of the 19 questions were: on a scale of 1 to 5, low to high, how would you rate the importance of receiving more guidance on the following? And we used already some of this this survey data to drive some of the education and communications that we did. Negotiating with my landlord, SBA loan processes, legal issues, how to work better from home. So, when you looked at the weighted answers, they all fell kind of almost equally. So we seemed to really touch on things that everyone felt they wanted some guidance on. Probably the most, if you go by the percentages, appropriate and effective marketing right now and when we open, and then how to keep my customers and clients probably scored the highest in terms of what they wanted to know about. But in essence, they wanted to know about all of these topics. And so we will continue to offer the webinars and share other webinars and information as we go until we've touched on every single one of these. On a scale of 1 to 5, this is what we just did. This is the graphic depiction. And 18 was: in what way can the Economic Development Office be more helpful? Some of the written answers we got here: continued guidance and support, be safe and cautious with reopening, contrasting with please help us get our business open quicker. Negotiate with my landlord. That was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek one, but I have to say we actually did do that. Advertising, promoting local business, hold webinars with local professionals, and continuing on, hold workshops to demystify government speak. There's a lot of that out there, of course. Promote Southbury outside of the area. Look at tax relief for 2020. Keep sending the updates. They're finding them helpful. Promoting shop local, promoting farmers market and farms, letting us know about local grants, and extending the PPP loan forgiveness, which I know is something that is continues to be talked about extending the ability to apply for that loan forgiveness. The 19th question of the COVID-19 questionnaire was, do you want to be contacted by the Office of Economic Development? Many of you did ask to be contacted, and many of you have so far. Please know that we will continue to be reaching out through that list that have said that they would like to be contacted. But here's my contact information. In the meantime, if you haven't heard from me and you want to call or email me directly, there that is. So just to look at a snapshot and summary, it seems that the most pressing need based on this survey was cash flow then and going forward. A leading concern is the uncertainty of the moment. That certainly is, how do you plan for the future of your business with all the uncertainty that is we're in. It's a high level of stress and anxiety that has been coming through loud and clear. Business owners are concerned for the safety of both their employees and customers. The concern about how to keep their employees on, about 32.5% said that. Concern about the PPP loan forgiveness, given that 64.3% of our participants said that they received one. and finally retaining customers and clients. So before we kind of dive into that, I wanted to just jump to reopening Southbury, and now we are into phase one, which began May 20th. And I did want to let everybody know that we in Southbury are following the Connecticut phased reopening guidelines. Again, phase one being the 20th, phase two estimated as June 20th, and phase three 4 weeks after that. The spell out of that phases and what businesses are eligible and every step in the process is all found on this link I have here, which is the roadmap that was done. It was released on the 26th of May. I've shared it in some of my updates. The governor's Reopen Connecticut report. It's very, very detailed, and that is where it contains all of those businesses opening, eligible to open with each phase. And I should note that it is not required to open. Just because just because salons were eligible to open June 1st doesn't mean that every single one of them have to open. It's entirely up to them, and they do need to follow the self-certification process and take all the steps before they open those doors. I want to remind everybody that Town Hall is open for business. It actually never closed for business. It is still by appointment to assist with the reopening process. We did take steps with outdoor dining and outdoor retail to make permitting easy. It's just a one sheet. It's pretty much a one-day turnaround and with no fee. And you just go to the zoning link here I provided if you want to fill out those permits and get your outdoor dining and outdoor retail setups done. I know many of you already have outdoor dining in the restaurant sector, but some have expanded it to areas of their property that didn't previously were permissible. A few other resources to note. One is this very detailed small business reopening resource guide the DECD put out. This is a link to that. It includes all the supplies and where to get them for the thermometers and the PPP masks, etc. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the PPP is still available. So as you can see in this survey, about 65% have taken it, but there's still probably many of you out there that have not. Partly, as I've heard, because you were uncertain as to when you were going to be able to bring your employees back on, and you felt like it was premature. Well, it is still available. So if your lender is not able to accommodate, this is a list here, a resource list of lenders, approved SBA lenders. I would suggest, because there is no indication that there is swiftly soon to be any further federal funding coming, that you take advantage of this opportunity. Even if you were to apply for the PPP and not be able to fulfill the forgiveness requirements, it still converts to a 1% loan. So I would highly recommend, if you're having the cash flow issues and some of the concerns that have been expressed in the survey, that if you have not taken advantage of the PPP, that you do take it, get it while you can. The state of Connecticut has asked that all municipalities create a long-term recovery committee. We are beginning to do this here in Southbury. I am co-chairing it with Finance Director Dan Colton, and it's in coordination with our regional long-term recovery partners and the state. And this is to predominantly make sure that all municipal unmet needs are addressed. And with that, I want to move into some discussion of what we've been hearing and some analysis. And at that, I thought I'd open it back up to my colleague here, Ron. Ron, what do you make of this?
Well, first of all, Kevin, again, thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it. I'm not sure how many people are on. I just want to make sure people understand or do know that I am a Southbury resident, been involved in a lot of different things in Southbury, and I've been here doing economic development for Naugatuck for the last 7 years or so. I thought your survey was excellent. I think that that you did a very good job of discussing it with the people that are on this webinar. I also want to say that that I was a very strong advocate, along with my very close friend Ann Armino, who is the chair of the Economic Development Commission, a very strong advocate, both of us, to get an economic development director. took a little time. I think the town did a very good job of going out and trying to find who might be interested. And so we get Kevin. Kevin decided to accept the position, became part of the town. And I don't know how long you were in before this international pandemic started. So I'm not sure if we're, that the fact that you joined the economic development team here in Southbury or in Southbury, and that caused the pandemic. I don't believe that to be the case, but I'm very glad that you're there. And you're doing a heck of a job, and I really do appreciate that. Some of the things that I wanted to talk about, certainly Southbury is very close to my heart, is that I live there, I own a piece of property there, and I think very highly of the town. I think it's a really very nice town. A lot of people, very good people. We've been there, my wife and I, 13 years. And as I said earlier, I've been involved in a lot of different things in town. So I want to talk a little bit about not necessarily Southbury economic development, because I think with Ann Armino and the economic development team that they have there, the first selectman, and of course, Kevin, I think you're off to a really good start. So I'm glad to see that. I want to talk a little bit about what we're trying to do here in Naugatuck. So I've been here for 7 years, as I said, and I was in Waterbury for about 1.5 years. And I've done a lot of chamber work and a whole variety of things, including as a teacher many, many years ago, and also ran a brass and copper mill in Woodbury back about 30 years ago. So I've been around a little bit, so I have a lot of experience. Some of the things that we're working on here in Naugatuck, for example, we have, and a lot of my colleagues around the state get a little tired of me when I say that we have, if not the best, one of the best industrial parks in the state. And it's very well run because I run it. And it's we've got some fabulous companies up there. We have very, very little room for new people to come in, which is a difficulty for a economic development person. I met with some people yesterday looking for a smaller amount of land of 6,500 square feet. And they wanted to come to Naugatuck. They loved the idea that they could go right to the Boston area if they have to, when they go up Route 8 and 84, and they go down to Bridgeport, Fairfield County, and into New York. So our transportation is really excellent. We're right, as Southbury is right off 84, of course. So I wanted to mention that. We're working a lot on our downtown. Now, interestingly, Naugatuck is a much different town, as you might expect, from Southbury, because we've had nothing but industrial for many, many years here in Naugatuck. And a lot of the big companies that have been in Naugatuck have unfortunately left us, and left us with big environmental issues. So environmental issues is a big part of my job. We do a lot with the ECD. We do a lot of environmental remediation. And just today, I returned a check from DEC into our NEDC here, and we turned it over to the town for quite a bit of money for a group of people that have been working on environmental remediation. So that's a big part of my job. The other thing that we're working very hard on is to, not necessarily to renovate, but to upgrade our downtown, which is a beautiful downtown. Those of you that know Naugatuck, it's a really nice downtown. We have some very good shops downtown, and we have some really good restaurants. We're also working with the Chamber of Commerce here to do a restaurant program, and we're calling it Eat Local and Win Local. And so the way we've set it up is that somebody would go to one of our restaurants here in town, would send me and my office a receipt. We're going to put them all into a big bowl and pick a winner out every week starting on June 15th, which is next week, or I guess next week or the week after. It's a Monday. And I guess the week after. And then we're going to give out gift cards that the restaurants have donated to this program. So we're working on that. One of the big things that we have going on, and there was an article in the Waterbury paper this morning about a joint project that Waterbury and Naugatuck have a piece of property adjacent to our industrial park. It's approximately 164 acres owned by the city of Waterbury for many, many years. And it goes back so far that I'm involved in this piece of property. About 35 years ago, I was the representative from Naugatuck working with Waterbury at that point, trying to find something that we could do on that. And in that article today, they talked about casinos that wanted to be built, a hotel wanted to be built. There was a racetrack that was being discussed back in the 80s. None of that has worked. And the biggest reason that it hasn't worked is access to that particular piece of property through Waterbury was very difficult. Now remember, Waterbury owns 164 acres of that property. Of that property, about 46 acres is in Naugatuck. So the mayor of Waterbury and the mayor of Naugatuck have worked together, as have the economic development people in both cities and town, to access that property through Naugatuck. So we're in the process of doing that. Mayor O'Leary put out a request for proposals. Somebody has answered that, and we're now working with that particular piece of project. So we're working on that, and it's going to take a while, obviously. It's a very difficult piece of land, but we're going to get it done at some point. We're working on two major projects here in Naugatuck. One we refer to as our Parcel B. So we have a Parcel A, a Parcel B, and a Parcel C. Parcel C has now been renovated, and we have a building there, a beautiful piece of property there. Parcel B, what we're working on is a transit-oriented development and adjacent to the railroad tracks. These are all Naugatuck, former Naugatuck rubber shop pieces of property. So there is environmental issues on all three of these projects, and that's part of what we've been continuing working on. This transit-oriented development, we're hoping to upgrade the rail line. And again, it's been local news that the Bond Commission had on their agenda new cars going on for that particular rail line, and then it was withdrawn. So we're still working on that. I sent a letter, a very nice, kind letter to the governor, describing how important it is for not just Naugatuck, not just Waterbury, but the entire line all the way down through the Naugatuck Valley. I actually like Ned Lamont very much. I think in pandemic COVID-19 situation, he's doing a very good job, but I have not gotten an answer from him yet. So we're hope to do that. And then the other real big project that we have going is called the Port of Naugatuck. Now you'd say Port of Naugatuck, it's right on the Naugatuck River. A couple of years ago when we started this, an older gentleman who I've known for many, many years here in Naugatuck caught me on the street one day, and he said to me, you know, I always thought you were crazy, and now you want to bring boats up the Naugatuck River. I said, no, that's really not it. It's all about freight lines. And we have a customer in Maine that wants to do it, and we need to upgrade the freight line, and we're in the process of doing that. We've asked for a grant from the federal government, and that's in process. And this company in Maine brings about 125 to 150 tractor trailers from Maine down into New York and New Jersey, going right through Connecticut, never paying any tolls. And that is something we would like to get those trucks off and use freight lines, freight trains. Right. So that's a lot of what I'm doing on a daily basis. And if there's questions about what's going on in Naugatuck or in economic development around the state from any of your participants today, I'd be very happy. Hi, Mark. I'd be very happy to answer, or at least attempt to answer some of those questions. And again, Kevin, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ron. I appreciate you sharing some time with me and sharing on what's going on in Naugatuck. You know, it's interesting, and not a lot of people might realize, but Southbury is part of the Naugatuck Valley Council of Governments, or the NVCOG, as it's called.
Absolutely.
You know, not everybody quite understands that. And when we all come together on a monthly basis and talk about the whole valley, so of course some of these things have been, you know, a unified effort. things like the transit, for example. And
Absolutely.
some might not realize that, well, what role does Southbury play in there being a transit line? And I think it should be obvious, but it's not. That people can maybe live in Southbury, but they're going to go to that train station and take it on down,
Absolutely.
all the way down to perhaps New York City, depending on the connections they take.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you mentioned the NBCOG. It is absolutely great organization. Rick Dunn is the executive director. Could not be a better executive director for that operation. The CEOs of all the different towns, whether they're first selectmen or mayors, all get along very well. Mayor O'Leary, who I mentioned earlier, is the chair of the COG. It's just an excellent operation, and it's run so well. I'm on one of the subcommittees about brownfields, because everything that we touch here in town and in Waterbury and all up and down the valley is a brownfield, and we need environmental help and environmental expertise, which we do get from the COG and other people. So glad you brought up the COG. I ran into, when I was in town hall in Southbury, was it just yesterday you and I met? Was it, days go by so fast. It might have been.
I think it was a couple days ago, yeah.
I ran into Jeff Manville, and we had a very nice conversation, even though we're on opposite sides of a lot of issues in town, not necessarily nasty at all. He's a good person. He works hard, and we get along very, very well. And when I was chairman of the Democratic Town Committee, again, I mentioned Ann Armino, who was chairperson of the Republican Town Committee, and people in town were kind of wondering how we got along so well. And we've worked together on a lot of different issues. She's a great lady. So a lot of good people in Southbury, a lot of good businesses in Southbury. And again, I want to say I'm glad you're there. And
well, thank you, Ron. That is absolutely true. I found that to be, in the short amount of time that I've been here, the community has embraced this office, this position of hiring me. It was like you said, a long time coming. The EDC has done a great job for hundreds of years, and now they finally.
I know you think I'm getting old, but I'm not. I haven't been involved for 100 years. But it has been a while. Economic development. I served on the Economic Development Commission in Southbury when I was first moved in there, and when I got elected to the Board of Selectmen, which I think was in 2011, goes by so fast. Then I resigned, but I've always been involved in economic development, and it's so important. I don't care what community it is; it's so important. And,
it is, and you touched on a couple things with the work you're doing in Naugatuck, and just to kind of relay it to Southbury for folks who don't know. So, for example, the part that you mentioned about doing the drawing, the sort of, it's called the raffle. That's an example of something that a corp can do as a 501c3, but many people don't realize, but a municipality cannot do something like that. And that's why some towns, depending on their size and vitality, may elect to create a corp. Certainly cities like Naugatuck, Shelton is a great example that have done this, and that model works very well. It allows them to go seek funding that is not necessarily funding available to municipalities. You have to have a 501c3. And so, as Southbury evolves and grows, whether it means that we might develop some sort of 501c3 ourselves, or whether we just partner with others. One of the things I'm trying to do with the pandemic recovery efforts, the long-term recovery efforts, is work on securing fiduciary, so funding opportunities for businesses, because I do see this to be, an ongoing issue, as our survey certainly showed. This is not just going to be over in a fortnight. So as businesses continue to have that need, and as federal and state dollars perhaps dry up, what are the ways that the municipality can step into that category, and maybe not necessarily serve as fiduciary, maybe not necessarily put up the funds, but gain access to them and make them available to businesses in, let's say, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 range, for some short-term, low-interest capital. I think
So
that's going to be important.
our setup here in Naugatuck is unique. And you mentioned Shelton, and when we put this together, and I wasn't part of it at that point, but they did sort of mirror what Shelton has done. So we are a public-private partnership. So the town gives us certain amount of money every year. I go to the finance board. I've been around Naugatuck for a long time and served in government here in Naugatuck, so I'm fairly well known. And I like to think I'm well respected. We've done some really good. Well, we've done some really good work. So it if you don't do anything, it's a little difficult to be respected in this economic development situation. So I go to the finance board every February and I give them a presentation. I don't ask for more money. I'm always happy to get what we get. And then we actually, what we refer to as private sector funding, we go out to the businesses. So we're a public-private partnership with the town of Naugatuck and the business community. And I like it this way. I have a board that I work with. It's a board made up of a whole variety of people. The mayor, of course, is on the board. The member of the finance board is on the board. And then the superintendent of schools is on the board. And there's one other spot from which is my role. And so we have 4 people that are on that board. And then the rest of the group, and we have about 21 people. We have a nominating committee, and it's all portions of the town. So it really works out very, very well. And I'm very comfortable in the way we do business here in town.
I did want to mention one of our guests that's joined us on the Zoom call is from the Connecticut Small Business Development Center. For folks that don't know, the CTS-BDC is a offshoot of the national SBA, the Small Business Administration. And of course, that's where the federal funding has been managed and coming through to the banks. So the CTS-BDC remains available to help businesses with their applications for the SBA funding. So whether it's the PPP or one of the other offerings that they have, they're available to help with that application process. And their services are free of charge. CTS-BDC is part of UConn's organization, so the funding comes through that channel, and so any business that uses their services pays nothing. So I do encourage anybody that is still yet to apply for that, or who is working now on their PPP forgiveness, feel free to contact the Small Business Development Center regarding both the PPP programs and the EIDL programs, the Economic Disaster Loan Program. You can find all that at their website, www.ctsbdc.com. It's all confidential. You just request a free meeting. And so do take advantage of that. And they have been ramping up their staffing. So they've got even more people, hired here in Connecticut and probably around the country, frankly, to meet this greater need.
I just saw coming up on the screen, thanking you for saying that. And I was going to say basically the same thing about them. They're very easy to deal with, really good people. Interestingly, in economic development, there is a group of people that do get together. Not lately, obviously. We have lunch at least once every couple of months. A really good person named Tom Morano, who is the economic development person in Middletown, is organized.
Yep.
You know Tom? He's a fat guy.
Great guy.
He calls me the Don. I call him the Godfather, and he's such a good person. So since all this pandemic, which maybe you caused when you came to Southbury, I'm not sure about.
The timing was terrible, right?
It's amazing. Yeah, it is amazing. So he's been doing virtual meetings, and it's not quite the same. It's really not quite the same. But when we get back to normal, if there is ever a time we get back to normal, we'll go back to these luncheons, and everybody has the opportunity to talk about what they're doing in their town. And it's amazing every single time you say something, I'm having a little problem doing this. And somebody will say, well, wait a minute, did you try that? And next thing you know, you have solved your problem because your colleagues are so helpful. So a lot of people think economic development people only care about their only towns. And there's some truth to that, frankly. But for the most part, no, that is not the case. I think the people that I deal with on a daily basis that are also economic development people around the area care mostly about the state of Connecticut. It's very, very important. And we all get along well. Once this thing gets started up again, I'm going to bring you to one of those luncheons and make sure you get to know all these people. You probably know a lot of them anyway. You've been to, as a matter of fact, you've been to a couple of them when you were in.
The network of economic development professionals is a tight one here in the state, and it certainly helped having mentors like yourself and having working for the organization Advanced CT, which was formerly CERC, definitely put me in touch with many across the state. And this particularly, as you mentioned, this pandemic has actually created in some ways even a tighter network, because many of us have been bouncing ideas off of each other or including each other on our updates. And then I'll see something on, Newtown's update that maybe I missed, and I'll include it in my next one. So whether it's Crystal in Newtown, whether it's Karen up in New Milford, my former spot, whether it's Tom Madden down in Stamford, I mean, just really folks all over the place. We have this little camaraderie and dialogue going. And then, of course, there's the actual association, the CETUS of economic professionals, the association, of course, as well.
You mentioned Tom is a terrific guy. He's very, very helpful, and he's got an amazing knowledge of economic development. He's in Stamford, a little bit helpful, but he's a good guy. I like working with him. So.
Absolutely. So, as we've seen here, the need is great. We're not going to keep our foot off the gas in Southbury or in Connecticut, for that matter. We're going to press on. All the businesses, they're the ones fighting the fight every day, and I don't feel that any of us who are in this profession of development fail to recognize that it's always better to retain a business. I'd say it's easier, but in some ways I guess that's true. It's to retain a business versus going out and getting a new one to come to your town. So I want each and every business in Southbury to know how important they are to Southbury, to our business community. It is a community, and we're making strides in keeping everybody connected and feeling like we're all in this together. And frankly, that's the message also to the community, is to embrace your local business community more than you perhaps ever have before. Understanding what they're going through, and keeping those doors open or getting them open, and trying to have a safe recovery from this crisis.
Yep, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned that. I think there's been times in our history, not just Naugatuck and Southbury, but certainly around the country, that businesses get a bad name sometimes, or a bad image. And sometimes it's because they did something wrong, and that does happen. But for the most part, most businesses are the ones that do donate to the charitable operations. Here in my office downstairs in this building is the United Way of Naugatuck and Beacon Falls, which I've been involved with for years and years. And they do an amazing job. And the only way that they could continue is the corporate contributions and the people that work in those businesses. And Lisa Shappy, who works here as the executive director, does a great job.
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of business is very, very important. It's extremely important, and I would say a very, very high percentage, close to 100% of businesses donate, work hard, hire people, and try to do the best they possibly can. Now, every single business wants to turn a profit. You have to turn a profit, no question about it. It's not a bad thing to turn a profit. Matter of fact, it's a bad thing not to turn a profit. And most of these people are very generous, and the people in Southbury especially are extremely generous to local things and needs, and people here in Naugatuck are the same.
Yeah, and given this current crisis that we're in, you mentioned nonprofits. I mean, so many efforts, things like the grocery brigade, which has delivered hundreds and hundreds of meals, or bringing groceries to people that couldn't get out to get them. The volunteer base has been enormous, and it is good to see that folks, as they are going through this and maybe have a little more time on their hands because they haven't been working because the jobs were shut down, converted some of that energy that they had on the job to the volunteerism, knowing that there were folks that were just too much at risk to step out their doors.
Right.
So we thank them. You're right, it's a very generous community. And also with nonprofits is, you mentioned profitability of businesses, but as someone who's worked in nonprofits as a professional fundraiser, can tell you myself, and been a board chair, that keeping that balance sheet and keeping the funds coming in and not going underwater is as important, if not as more than it is to a business. You have to have it.
And in this situation, it gets obviously much more difficult to do that. So this morning, we had 4 police officers came into our office, and what they were doing was going through. One of them was my son. I have to say that. Great kid. We're very proud of him. And 3 of he runs the Naugatuck Police Department's first shift, and he had 3 young people, and they could not have been nicer. Wonderful people. And they came in, and they're going up and down Church Street here, stopping at different businesses and talking to people about a protest that's going to be happening on Saturday at noon, and just making sure that everybody's aware of it and all that. So we work in economic development. People work closely with every aspect of the local community, and that's why I mentioned the police department. We work very closely with them. We do fundraising with them, and a lot of different things. And we, whenever there's an issue in the industrial park, and every once in a while, I'll get a call from somebody in the industrial park that somebody dumped tires with the whole bunch of tires. I don't know where they got them all. So I have to inform the police department, and then I talk to the public works people, and they clean it up for us. So you have to have that relationship with everybody. And
Absolutely.
I know you're doing that in South.
It's a vital, economic development, as maybe people don't know, but you're certainly touching on, is that it is an integral part of the community, a part of the municipal government system, and yes, we work across the board with all the different areas, at different times, intertwining in our work. It's one of the things I like about it. It's a very diverse field.
It is, and it's very interesting. And as an athlete that I've always felt I have been, when you do something for a business, or you bring a new business into town, it's like winning a baseball game. And maybe that's not a really good comparison, but it's something that makes you feel really, really good. And
absolutely. And we're going to win the game, hopefully, here, Ron. We're running the bases, at least.
That's right. You got to get people on base first before you can get them home. But
that's right. I'm gonna share here my screen one more time, and actually I'll stop right here just in case there's anybody that's on our call here today that wanted to ask a question. I will open it up. I don't see any hands raised, but I will certainly leave it open if somebody would like to before we wrap up our call here today. hopefully I can tell if somebody's. All right. All right. Well, if you do subsequently or after the fact, here is my contact information and Ron's contact information. I'll leave this up for just a moment while I thank Ron again for joining us today and to talk about the survey results and talk about our current situation and what's going to happen going forward. And I thank all of you for joining us. As I said, this is the contact information for us if you want to reach out subsequently. And we will be making a recording of this available, as well as the slides that we showed of the survey. We'll make that available as well. So with that, thank you, Ron.
Kevin, thank you so much again for having me. I'm always available for you for anything you need, any help I might be able to offer. I would suggest not to ask me for advice, because I'll probably give you the wrong advice, but anything you need from me. And I really do appreciate you having me on.
Thanks very much. Take care, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this call. And we look forward to next week's webinar, and the details will follow. Take care.
Thank you.